everybody, and welcome back to Revisiting, and like I said in my Turok 2 revisit video, I am now revisiting the game's predecessor, Turok Dinosaur Hunter. Released in 1997, Turok Dinosaur Hunter is a first-person shooter video game, developed by the now-defunct Iguana Entertainment, and published by the now-defunct Acclaim Entertainment. The original game was released on Microsoft Windows and Nintendo 64, the latter of which is the system where I, my dad, and my brother discovered the game. I actually have a funny story about that, actually. When I was young, my dad, my brother, and I were at a game store that sold Nintendo 64 games. We were looking for a new game to play on the system, and my brother picked up Turok here, because it had a dinosaur on the cover art. My brother loved dinosaurs when he was young. So my brother gave it to my dad and asked if the game had blood in it. My dad, who didn't know the answer to this, went to the counter and asked the clerk the same question. I think the clerk responded with something along the lines of tons or oh yes. Hearing that, from what I remember, my dad immediately resolved to buy the game from the guy for my brother and I, who were both very young at the time, so this definitely wasn't at the same mature level as we were, I guess I could say. So, once we got home, instead of my brother who had asked for the game, it was my dad who had ended up playing the game the most. In fact, my brother and I loved to sit there and watch him play through the game all the time. I don't think my dad ever got past level 3 of this game, but he loved to play through this game often. Now, apparently from what I've seen online, when this game came out, it was a big deal. First of all, Turok Dinosaur Hunter was the first third-party video game that was released for the Nintendo 64. The game was also a huge technological feat at the time, with multiple textures, multiple enemy types, and huge open levels all fitting on an 8 megabyte cartridge, almost bringing the Nintendo 64 here to its limits. Finally, there's something very interesting I learned in the process of writing for this video. According to the New York Daily Times, when Turok Dinosaur Hunter was released, Acclaim's stock price grew from 62 cents to $5.94, which is a very significant jump. The source for that information, by the way, is in the description. In fact, it seems as if sales for Turok did so well that it saved Acclaim from potential financial ruin. Turok as a franchise would actually go on to become one of the best in Acclaim's library, for better and, for one instance, for worse, which we'll get to when I cover Turok Evolution. Now, this Turok title actually differs from its successor in some pretty significant ways. Dinosaur Hunter offers a more straightforward experience in contrast with the more objective-based Turok 2. There are no mission objectives in this game, only keys. Yet, Turok Dinosaur Hunter actually features more optional side paths that only offer optional health and ammunition to pick up. Dinosaur Hunter is also paced quicker than Turok 2. I can beat this game in about an hour and a half, while Turok 2 it takes me about 15 hours to beat that game. Another contributing factor to this would be how Tal Set, the protagonist of Dinosaur Hunter, moves faster than Joshua does. The enemies in the game will also respawn quickly, meaning that staying in an area could result in lost health and ammunition, thus you have to stay on the move in this game. Additionally, Turok Dinosaur Hunter is even more cryptic about where its key collectible items are than in Turok 2. Level 2 specifically has this egregious point where you have to drop down to a platform that's camouflaged so that you only see the top of the trees that are placed on this platform. Tal Set has some serious jumping power in this game as well. He can sometimes jump whole gaps or around building walls. This is probably because of the emphasis of platforming in this game. Being one of the first FPSs to be released on consoles, players at the time wouldn't be used to this type of gameplay, so I can see Iguana being lenient when designing the jump mechanic for this game. But going back to jumping, in the original release, if you double tapped one of the side buttons, you would do this leap to the side. This would be a big detriment to the game, as strafing is actually very important in Dinosaur Hunter for going around corners and fighting bosses. In fact, this would be so detrimental that in the original, I would accidentally jump off cliffs or platforms because of this mechanic. Dinosaur Hunter also birthed the term that I use, which is the Tarak Jump. This term is something that I normally just use exclusively and in private when I'm just playing games. And what the Tarak Jump is that it's where you will either wait until the last second to jump off of a ledge in order to make your jump, or you fall off of a ledge and then jump in mid-air, which you can do in this game. If you fall off of a ledge and jump at the right time, you can jump in mid-air to make some jumps. And sometimes you will need to do this. There are some pretty significant gaps that you need to jump within Turok Dinosaur Hunter. But even with Nightdive's remaster, which is the version I played for this video, Turok Dinosaur Hunter still feels dated in some aspects, in my opinion. Now, there can be some obvious things to point out for Turok here, like texture quality, lack of any narrative outside very minute cutscenes, or the AI, which is for the most part pretty simplistic, where normally you'll just see AI running around or just standing in place. However, one aspect that really does date Turok Dinosaur Hunter for me is its sound quality. The sound quality is actually worse than I remember in the game. There's a lot of fuzz and white noise to be heard within the mix here. I think some of the audio even peaks and tears, while other noises are very compressed so that they can meet the space requirements at the time. There's also some weird audio glitches you can hear every once in a while, where the same sound will start repeating and layering on top of itself for a brief moment in time. I noticed on this recent playthrough here that everyone's jump/dropping sound is the same, with only Tal Set's and the robot's grunts here being pitched down a little to try and sound different. Speaking of reusing sounds, I found something very interesting during my recent playthrough here. During the process of replaying this game, I had bought the Aphex Twin album Selected Ambient Works 1985 to 1992. While listening through this album for the first time, I had noticed that on the track Green Calx, that there is a sound effect that is near identical to the sound effect that plays when you bring out the grenade launcher within Dinosaur Hunter. I found this a little suspicious, as Richard D. James's album only contains tracks that were made up to the year 1992 at the latest, while Turok Dinosaur Hunter was developed sometime around 1995 or 1996. So I did some digging. Turns out that James sampled the movie RoboCop, according to Whosampled.com. Now, the sounds that Whosampled.com points out aren't necessarily the sound that I'm talking about, and I haven't seen RoboCop, so I can't confirm this for sure, but I think Turok Dinosaur Hunter got their grenade launcher sound effect from the same place that Aphex Twin did, which very well may be RoboCop. It's either that, or the game uses a sound that James made for the track. I don't know if you might find this interesting, but for me, this is a huge deal for some reason. I just get very excited when I think about this. Now, despite the sound quality, the music in this game is damn good. Turok 2's is as well, and I had forgotten to mention that in its video. Darren Mitchell, the composer of both games, does a great job with the soundtracks here. In Turok Dinosaur Hunter, Mitchell uses more low-end instrumentation with lots of percussion like tribal drums, synths, and this almost helicopter-sounding horn with the way it reverberates. It's great, and I definitely recommend that you check it out. Staying with sound, normally when I play Dinosaur Hunter, I usually play with the audio off and music playing in the background so that I can really focus. With this recent revisit, I played the game with the audio on this time around, and I actually ended up doing worse than usual, and would undercut or overestimate jumps that I would normally make. There were definitely more errors this time around on my part in this recent playthrough. This is strange for me, as I might know more about Turok Dinosaur Hunter than Turok 2 in some aspects, because I can do things like predict where enemies will be, and shoot accordingly. Sometimes, I'll even shoot before there are enemies on the screen. Of course, despite my earlier opinion on Turok Dinosaur Hunter about how it feels dated, I still think that it's a very solid piece of software and a very solid game. and it only stands to improve as Nightdive's additions and edits to the game smooth out any level design problems that I had from the original. Like in level 1, where in the original release, the first key you had to pick up would require you to know where this hidden climbable wall was. But here in the remaster, it's right out in the open and literally placed in front of you, so you can't miss it. There are some more new things I noticed in this more recent playthrough that I would take for granted before. Starting out with the backpack item, which is a great bonus item that allows you to hold more ammunition for your weapons as long as you stay alive. It's also worth noting that explosive weapons in Turok Dinosaur Hunter can hurt you, so don't shoot missiles or grenades too close to you like I sometimes do in this game. There are also no spawning pools in Turok Dinosaur Hunter, except for in the boss arenas. This is probably because you can't leave these unless you beat them, so the developers threw the players a bone here. Still, I find that this is really neat, how Iguana expects a lot more out of the player in this game, despite Dinosaur Hunter being the first game in the franchise, and one of the first FPS console experiences. Another neat thing that I learned is that if you die and the last checkpoint you got was in a world you were not in, you will spawn in that previous world. I didn't know this could happen. This phenomena interests me a lot, again, for some reason. I can't really explain why this interests me so, it just does. Now, whenever I go from Turok 2 to this game, I always think that the blue health objects in this game are worth like 10 health points, like in Turok 2, but in Turok Dinosaur Hunter, they're actually worth 25 health points, so they're definitely worth picking up if you're in a bind. Speaking of Turok 2, I also accidentally run past things in this game because both of the faster pace and the changes in the level design that Nightdive introduce. It's also interesting to look at the reoccurring characters between Turok Dinosaur Hunter and Turok 2. The Perlin look completely different, while the Leapers look relatively the same, and the Mantids are somewhere in the middle of that. But unlike Turok 2, I go in sequential order for the worlds in Turok Dinosaur Hunter. Mostly this is because in Turok 2, it's beneficial to get the weaponry in the lighter levels first, like getting the Shredder and the Death Marches, then going back to the earlier levels because of the spawning pools. But in Turok Dinosaur Hunter here, this really doesn't make a difference because there are no spawning pools in the game. So sequential order just seems more of a given. I also found a weird glitch in the game, where sometimes if you get too close to the edge, the game will think that Tal Set went over the edge and will kill you. But the death camera, which normally shows you falling, will show Tal Set in his falling animation, but he's falling in place, because he's technically still on the ground. This glitch has happened to me twice in this playthrough alone, but I haven't really run into it before, so I don't know what causes it. Also, just recently I've been finding that the assault rifle has a lot more use to it, and can be used pretty far into the game until I would say at least up to World 6. I normally don't use the later, more powerful weapons in the game, like the fusion cannon or the shockwave weapon. This is mostly because of the non-existence of the spawning pools within Turok Dinosaur Hunter. I just think that it'd be more of a waste of time to use them on anything other than the bosses. Speaking of the worlds within Turok, I do like the progression of the level aesthetics between the worlds. Despite looking very similar because of reused textures, each world manages to evolve upon the previous's concept. The aesthetic progression of the Lost Land setting within the game gives off a real sense of progression. In fact, this type of level design would be used within all of the levels within Turok 2 Seeds of Evil. All of Seeds of Evil's levels feature beginnings and endings that look completely different from each other because of how level aesthetics evolve. So speaking of the worlds or the levels within Turok Dinosaur Hunter, let's go through them real quick. World 1, the Hub, is a pretty well put together introduction to the game's main mechanics, from both the FPS attributes and the platforming attributes. You get a sense of the game's emphasis on exploration of its worlds, on a small scale here, and every scene built is one where you would normally always be running through the whole landscape. These are some very well put together scenes. World 2, the Jungle, uses a lot of the same assets as the Hub does, and in my opinion it's the most boring level in the game here, Mark Bussler of Classic Game Room actually brought this up in his review of this game, and I agree a lot. The setting isn't very interesting here, and they won't start to evolve until later on in the game, which is where Level 3, the Ancient City, comes in. This is where the game's settings start to get a bit more interesting, with buildings and structures used, and the color palette is pretty much the same here, with devalued greens and a lot of desaturated tan. The enemy types are also relatively the same, despite their aesthetic change to these more aboriginal-looking skeleton warriors. The boss of the ancient city is called the Long Hunter. This character is actually based off of a character within the Turok comics. The character in the comics is called Israel Crockett, and he also calls himself the Long Hunter. This boss used to be pretty tough for me to beat. I would always have to lose a couple of lives just to beat him. But now that I don't have to deal with Spring Look, and I can stockpile my ammunition a bit better, the Long Hunter is a little easier now for me. World 4 The Ruins is where the game starts to add some more verticality in the level design, as well as some more non-linearity, as this whole world here revolves around this one open hub that has a few branching paths along the way. World 5, The Catacombs, is where my familiarity with the game starts to wane a bit, and that's mostly because this level is just a series of gray hallways that all look the same. It's very easy to get lost in this level. From what I understand, Nightdive changed this level up a bit to make it easier to navigate. I don't know if that's true because I couldn't find any sources to really confirm that, but this level loves to twist and turn to the point where it's very easy to lose where you are. On the flip side, I really like the aesthetic of World 6, the Treetop Village. The wooded walkways, spiraling staircases up tree trunks, and the lightning strikes give off a real sense of atmosphere and stakes. Treetop Village is one of the harder levels in the game because of its small areas of walking spaces. The entire stage is defined by its bottomless pits. One wrong move and you're falling to your death. World 7, The Lost Land, is where the look of the game starts to change drastically. Instead of foggy jungles, now there are lava pits, skeletons, and dinosaurs with weapons attached to them, as well as the humanoid enemies, which are now robots. The robots are a great enemy type for the latter parts of Turok Dinosaur Hunter here, because they either aren't damaged or take very little damage from certain types of weaponry, like the assault rifle, so you have to change up your strategy and the weapons you use. As a final world, World 8, The Final Confrontation, is a great counterpoint to the first world of the game. World 8 takes place almost exclusively inside of a giant metallic fortress, with all of these tight hallways, and all of the enemies are either mantids or robots, with the exception of a few purlin, leapers, and acid crabs. The final boss of the game is called the Campaigner, who is also from the comics. This boss is very easy if you have the Chrono Scepter, which is the game's equivalent to Turok 2's nuke weapon. You can charge the scepter up, then once it's charged, you release the shoot button to shoot a blue laser that can damage an enemy multiple times on contact. Once the laser collides with something, the point of impact explodes, leading to more damage being caused. It's a very satisfying weapon, but you can only get it if you beat the T-Rex boss, which by that point, all you have left to do is fight the Campaigner. Once the Campaigner is beaten, the final cutscene plays, and the game is over. You can go back and play the game with cheats, but for the most part, I always come back to the game and try to beat it faster than I normally did before, and at an hour and a half, that's not a big time commitment. Overall, I would absolutely recommend you pick up and play Turok Dinosaur Hunter. It's a very fun, first-person shooter with some breakneck action, creative environments, and weapons, and a hell of a soundtrack. Like Turok 2, I will not give this game a score, as I am nostalgically biased for this game, but I think that even with that being said, there's still enjoyable moments here, where gamers of all eras will find enjoyment in this classic shooter. As of recently, Turok Dinosaur Hunter released on the Switch, so you can pick it up there, or you can pick it up on the PC, or if you really want to, you can enjoy it in its original form on the Nintendo 64, although I don't really know why you would, as spring look and frame rate problems plagued that game. So, that's it.